Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, whenever you choose to listen in. Welcome to our podcast. This is the SlumpBuster. I am your host, Julian Martinez. This is going to be my partner in podcasting, Aundre Huynh. We are here recording on August 1st, 2019. And from here on out, we have 27 consecutive weeks of football. I am excited. Andre's excited. Hey, it's football season. Football is king. Everyone's excited. On this podcast, we're going to be discussing multiple things, not just NFL, but we're going to be touching into NBA, MLB, UFC, basically all things sports. But for the meantime, we're going to dive into the AFC-NFC North pictures for this podcast. All right, Aundre, I'm just going to throw it out there. Obviously, well-known, you're a Steelers fan. You're a Steelers diehard. Let's hide that bias a little bit, but we're going to jump right into kind of like their picture here in a minute. Actually, we're going to touch on the Melvin Gordon situation a little bit here. That's one of the big news headlines of the day. So Melvin Gordon requested a trade. Kind of a unique trend we're seeing, particularly with the running back position, with players being a little unsatisfied with how that position's been devalued. The use of the franchise tag, we saw it come to a head last year with the Le'Veon Bell situation, him choosing to hold out, obviously dashing the hopes of many fantasy football fans everywhere. So what are your kind of like general thoughts on the Melvin Gordon situation right now?
So I think it's kind of interesting. We see this a lot more in sports like basketball, right? Where you have one player that has such a large impact on the game, right? So let's take a LeBron James or a big, well-known case, Anthony Davis, right? Where Anthony Davis can literally be your entire team. And if he's unhappy and wants a trade, you sort of have to accommodate him. I'm glad that it's happening in football. I feel because there's, so many guys on the roster, right, that football players, despite them putting their body on the line more just because it's a contact sport, haven't necessarily been able to get paid what they're sort of owed, especially running backs, right? So your running backs usually last 5, 6, 7 years at most, right? Very few running backs are in the league much more than that. And I do feel that owners have use that sort of leverage against them. They've been able, running backs are a dime a dozen. You guys get hurt all the time. You're only going to be here for 5 years. Why should I pay you more? So I am happy to see a lot more running backs, right? Like Zeke is currently going through that. He's sort of on his holdout from the Cowboys, and they're likely either going to have to trade him or just pony up and pay him all the money that he wants. Now, as far as Melvin Gordon in particular, I don't know if it's necessarily the wisest decision. I don't think he's negotiating from a point of strength. Whereas Zeke, right, it was obvious when Zeke was out with the Cowboys, they did not do that well. I think this was also sort of what hurt Le'Veon Bell, is James Conner was there. The Steelers still did a fantastic job. They missed the playoffs, yes, but they still happened to do a really good job, much better than people had thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely touch on the Steelers too. I mean, definitely the Steelers do have a luxury that they have one of the best offensive lines in football, and that's definitely going to curtail or definitely amplify a lot of the skills of like most running backs. In particular, they've done a great job in the draft, and you definitely have to give it to James Conner, like bouncing back from obviously his condition and everything to come back on the field. But it's interesting. He obviously outdid a lot of Le'Veon Bell's production last year, which when you look at that, it kind of really showed why there's that general belief that running back is a dime a dozen. Running back is a replaceable position because, off the top of my head, I don't know what round James Conner was drafted in, but he certainly wasn't a first-round prospect. He wasn't a second round. Did you guys even get him in the third? You had a couple years ago, Kareem Hunt came out of the third round and led the NFL in rushing. So when you look at kind of like that value, that fact you could just basically pull guys in and have them compete, it's definitely a little discouraging, especially when you consider, I don't even consider Melvin Gordon to necessarily be in that upper echelon of running backs. He's definitely a solid contributor. He's been one of the better like fantasy running backs. Granted, like I love having him in the leagues I've participated in, but when it comes down to on-field production, I saw Austin Eckler perform amicably in that role. They had Justin Jackson come in and really do well in relief of Melvin Gordon when he was hurt down the stretch. And honestly, like, the fact that he's not on the field a lot too doesn't really make his case. You know?
Yeah. I totally agree with you. The other thing that I think people have to factor in as well, and maybe running backs aren't necessarily factoring this in. So obviously you have your running backs that are really good and stand out, right? Like Lev Bell is a fantastic running back. A Saquon Barkley is fantastic, Ezekiel Elliott. But also, how much is it that they rely on the line that's in front of them, right? And so if Melvin Gordon doesn't have a good line, he can maybe be the best running back in the league. But what happens when you have the best running back in the league with the worst offensive line in the league?
Yeah.
You're probably not going to get a whole lot of production out of them.
Well, too, if you just consider if you're dealing in a stagnant offense, sometimes when NFL teams start loading the box more, you're naturally going to see a drop-off in production. Look at David Johnson over there in Arizona. Like last year, with their quarterback situation kind of being a mess with Josh Rosen and everything else they were trying to piece together at that position, teams were just keying in on David Johnson, and his production is a far cry from where it was in years past. Certainly, like, obviously, too, you got to factor in that situation. He was coming off basically missing an entire year. But the fact that there was no other offensive pieces around him definitely hurt his production. And it's going to be interesting to see with a player like Melvin Gordon. So obviously he's requesting a trade. So it comes down to what's the market for Melvin Gordon right now. And I look around the league, and the Rams, obviously they broke the league with the Todd Gurley deal. They went out of their way to pay Todd Gurley. Some would say unnecessarily. And obviously it backfired on them with currently Todd Gurley's condition right now with the knee arthritis, you know. But when it's not like you're just trading for Melvin Gordon, you're also trading for a player with an injury concern, and then you're trading it to have to pay him. And when you do pay him, what are you paying him? Because you're not going to give him the Todd Gurley deal. I'm not even confident. Are you giving him something more comparable with Le'Veon Bell got? To touch on that Le'Veon Bell deal, I think that was a little bit of a letdown for him after that holdout. But what is Melvin Gordon's value sitting at? Is he a top 5 running back? Is he a top 10 running back? Maybe top 10 I could give him.
I could see that. Yeah, much more than top 5, probably not. Yeah, I think you're right. I think the Todd Gurley deal sort of threw off the economics of the entire running back market, right? Because now a whole lot of running backs want to get paid. I think it's similar to even some quarterbacks, right? Like I think Kirk Cousins, who we'll probably talk about, is probably overpaid. Now, granted, the quarterback position is just more valuable in general. But when you have teams that are just starting to go out and overpay, it sort of inflates the whole market, right?
Well, the tough thing, too, about that is the general way the NFL runs is it's next man out gets the next highest contract. I mean, we just saw that Michael Thomas just got the highest paid wide receiver contract. Granted, you could poke some holes in that. Like when you look at actually the guaranteed money, it's probably not necessarily what's all cracked up to be. But with that said, especially now, too, that you have Zeke holding out. This really kind of hurts Melvin Gordon more, I would say, even, because if it honestly deflates his trade value, because if you're a team looking to trade for a running back right now, would you rather contact the Chargers right now, Dean Spanos, and look to get Melvin Gordon, who's been injured, who's been off the field plenty of times, and is trying to get paid as a top 5 running back? Or would you rather call Jerry Jones right now and try and get Zeke's production? Would the Cowboys trade Zeke? I don't know. I mean, sure, he's been a headache off the field. Jerry's gone to bat for him a ton. But if I have those 2 running backs on the trade market, I'm probably targeting Zeke. He's been on the field, or when he's been on the field, he's been arguably the best running back in the league.
Yeah, and really the only time that he missed was that suspension, right?
Yeah, and
But
hey,
he,
a lot
yeah,
of alleged charges in there, a lot of gray area. Certainly, we weren't in the room. We don't know what may have happened in those situations. Obviously, the courts felt the need to drop the charges. The NFL really just, when you look at that suspension, probably just did it more so to save face more than anything. Give Zeke kind of a suspension more on the don't be an idiot suspension.
yeah. I mean, I definitely agree. Zeke definitely has his problems, right? But for the most part, he's been able to stay on the field. His other incidents have been, very small and minuscule compared to him being suspended for the length of time that he was previously. So I think I would much rather go with Zeke in that situation. And it does hurt Melvin Gordon.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at his trade value, I just don't know what the market is. I don't really see too many teams that I see as like ideal fits,
Mhm.
Like I would have said, like, if you would ask me maybe a few months ago, I would have said maybe like the Colts, but they seem like they're ready to rock and roll with Marlon Mack right now. You look at the Eagles, they just traded for Jordan Howard. I doubt that they're willing to make a move right now, especially because, again, you're trading for a new contract. You're going to end up paying Melvin Gordon close to $15 million a year, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see it as worth it. So honestly, if this situation goes any more than a couple more weeks, I think we might be on the verge of another Le'Veon Bell situation.
Yeah, I agree, right? Like, and obviously Lev Bell did not make the salary that he wanted. So I agree. I think Melvin Gordon is going in doing, which I think is fair, right? He wants to get paid what he's worth, but really, how much value is he worth, right? Is the
Yeah.
main, and he's definitely as much as some of the other running backs around the league.
It will definitely be a situation monitor. Hopefully, as the weeks go, we kind of get more clarity. And who knows, maybe if Zeke's holdout ends, that kind of changes the Melvin Gordon situation. It doesn't help that his teammates, Philip Rivers and company, are throwing him under the bus too in interviews.
Yeah.
We'll keep track of it. In the meantime, I think we should start kind of like carrying this podcast along. Let's start getting into our division kind of breakdowns.
Okay, well, before that, though, I just want to know, overall, do you think it's good or bad for the league, running backs holding out?
I think it's a bad precedent for the league, but in general, I've kind of been against this get the bag culture as a whole. I think that it only hurts fans, to be honest. What I do admire about the NFL is that even though you can argue it's more of an owner-controlled league, it's better for fans because obviously the distribution of players, talent, like if you're a fan of a team, you only really care about that team. And for better or worse, like with kind of like the player carousel that you'll see in the league, like if, let's say, obviously I'm a Niners fan, let's say Jimmy Garoppolo ended up playing for the Cowboys tomorrow. Would I still be a Jimmy Garoppolo fan? No, I'd be a Niners fan first. I think part of the thing that the NBA really wants is they really want you to be a fan of the NBA. They want you to be a fan of basketball more than anything. Whereas, hey, call it foolish-hearted fanhoods. I mean, honestly, fan is short for fanatic, but you're going to be more close to your team, especially regionally, Like if you grew up your whole life in Jacksonville, Florida, and you have a player holding out on your team, you're going to hold it against the player,
Yeah. No, I definitely get that.
But yeah, that's kind of my general philosophy on it. I think it's probably a bad precedent for a league, but at the same point, the salary cap's only going up and up and up from here. So more players are going to be able to get bigger paydays anyway. It's only going to hurt the bottom end guys, I think, though. The top end guys are always going to be profitable, but the bottom end guys are probably going to see their salaries reduced a little bit. But at one point, we'll probably talk about the potential for an 18-game schedule. That's definitely going to be in the works. And, hey, if people are interested in getting bigger paydays, it might come down to play more games.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So let's get into the AFC North. So we're going to start from the bottom up. We're going to kind of talk about, like, if this team wants to win a division. What went right for each team? So, we're going to start off first at the bottom of the division.
Mm-hmm.
Cincinnati Bengals. What would have to go right for the Cincinnati Bengals to win the division this year? We'll start off with that question first.
I think they would need Jesus to play on their team. Just to be quite honest with you.
You don't believe Jesus has red hair?
I do not believe Jesus has red hair. But whatever it is, I think they honestly need a miracle. AJ Green just got hurt. Their team was not that inspiring last year. They've been sort of that perennial middle of the pack team anyways. I think they need a miracle. What about you?
Well, I'm looking at it right now, and just recently there was a Quarterback Tiers article that came out, and you'd be surprised kind of actually what the reviews on Andy Dalton were. Basically what a lot of scouts, executives said around him is if you put the right team around him, Andy Dalton can succeed. If you have a top 5 roster in the NFL, Andy Dalton is a playoff quarterback. However, the problem is the Bengals probably have closer to a bottom 5 roster in the league. The AJ Green injury, devastating. You never want to see a talented player like AJ Green go down. The reasoning behind the injury is definitely where you get more and more agitated with the Bengals situation. So basically they were forced to practice on less than ideal field conditions. The players had already voiced concerns, and obviously you lose a high-end talent in Green. Heck, even some of the other wide receivers went down with injuries throughout the day. So the Bengals are banged up right now. They're banged up. Their talent is low. But I will say there is kind of a bright spot with them. They got rid of Marvin Lewis, Now, Marvin Lewis was a great coach for many years. Much respect to him. But at the end of the day, to be a coach for almost 2 decades in the league and not win a playoff game. Now, I don't know what Zach Taylor is going to be as a coach. I don't know if he's going to be good, bad. But at this point, they just need to do something different. When it comes to it, and it's kind of inspired a weird trend. Like basically, if you shook hands with Sean McVay at one point, you basically got a head coaching job. We're going to talk about Matt LaFleur later when we get into the Green Bay Packers. But I think that there is a little bit of something to Zach Taylor. I mean, obviously, he was there the last 2 years with Jared Goff. We saw Jared Goff take a huge leap. Now, obviously, Andy Dalton's a little bit further into his NFL career. So how much more learning is he going to be able to do at this point? Guess we'll see. But I think that provided that they can find some good health here in the next few weeks, like John Ross can maybe show why he was drafted in the first round. Tyler Boyd is a solid little receiver there. They have Joe Mixon, second-round pick, looked explosive at points last year. They have some offensive weapons, that's for sure. The downer, too, is another injury, too, to their first-rounder, Jonah Williams. We won't see him this year. You never want to hear that, especially from a top 10 pick. When it was discussed, and we'll discuss this guy a little later on, too, every mock I read had Devin Bush going over to them. And Devin Bush would have been a fantastic add to that defense, especially since this was a horrible defense, historically bad. I remember watching that game that they played against the Saints. It was seriously like watching a college team. This Drew Brees had no difficulty completing any pass. It was a gross game to watch, honestly. That's the only term I could think for that matchup. So what would have to go right for this team? I think the differences between Marvin Lewis and Zach Taylor would have to inspire some sort of rallying among the offense. Like, this team is going to allow a lot of points, but if they could get into some shootouts, maybe they might have a chance. Just because of the offensive weapons I listed earlier, maybe they get AJ Green back in a couple months, and if they're kind of a fringe playoff team, that might be their only real hope to sneak into the playoffs this year. Doubt they would even have a chance to win the division. Honestly, this is probably closer to a Miami Dolphins roster. I would probably rank them as a 4-12 right now.
That's actually exactly where I had them. It was about 4-12. I think you're right. Just too many injuries. Their young guys are promising, but they'd have to hit on all cylinders. One of the biggest stats that I saw was without AJ Green last season, they were 1-6. So if you don't get him back for the next few months, I just don't see a lot of hope for him. So yeah.
No. And the tough part about it is they're probably on the way for a rebuild at this point. Andy Dalton, I'm pretty sure if they have a 4-12 season, like we're saying, he's out the door. I doubt they would be even able to bring him back just to kind of be like a placeholder for whatever their next quarterback would be. Obviously, we know next year's draft class is going to be a little bit more quarterback rich than this past one. So they did draft a quarterback this year. But we kind of did the math in our own personal discussion. At this point in the league, over 2/3 of the quarterbacks in the league are first rounders. So at this point, they're going to go high round quarterback, I think, next year.
I agree. I think they're looking to move on to the future.
Okay, so let's move on to some more exciting teams. Certainly the most exciting team in the NFL right now, the Cleveland Browns. Being discussed as a potential Super Bowl pick. Vegas has them pretty high up there. Right now, they're the definite favorites to win the AFC North. But, that's factoring in a lot. There's a lot of big personalities on this team. A lot can happen. What's your kind of like general take on the Cleveland Browns?
So my take, so one, they're also my pick, at least to win this division, right? And that hurts a lot coming, being a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. But I do think that they're going to win it. That being said, I still think they are slightly overrated. A lot of people have them as a lock, like you said, even a potential Super Bowl pick. I don't know if they're necessarily that good. So their offense obviously got much better. They got Odell Beckham Jr., David Njoku is good. Kareem Hunt comes back. I think it's week 8, right? So I think all of their offensive weapons, if they're firing on all cylinders, if their defense is at least middle of the pack, I definitely think that they can win the division, possibly even make it close to the Super Bowl. My main concern though is Baker Mayfield, right? So a lot of people talk about a sophomore slump. That's statistically, there's no evidence to show like that's a trend around sports. However, if you look at since 2008, all the rookie quarterbacks that started in their rookie year and then went on to their sophomore season, the majority of the ones that did regress statistically were your smaller, your shorter, lighter quarterbacks, right? So even Russell Wilson, technically by QBR standards, regressed a little bit. Now, he still did fantastic, right? He still won a lot of games, won 13-3 his sophomore year. But a lot of the other quarterbacks, right, especially if you're under 6'4", that's where you tend to see more of the regression come. And so my concern with them is, one, can Baker Mayfield continue to improve, or is he going to take a step back? And then, like you said, a lot of the drama, right? We know a lot of these guys. Kareem Hunt obviously is on to his next team, right? So the Cleveland Browns picked him up because of some of the issues that he's had. Odell Beckham Jr., a lot of people have sort of labeled him very talented, but kind of a head case, right? He's kind of a prima donna, likes to have his way, acts out a little bit. And like I said, the defense was not the best last year. I don't think they were awful by any means. But I would like to see them at least be middle of the pack, if not make a push towards becoming better.
Okay, well, like when I'm kind of like looking at the Cleveland Browns right now, and you brought up some interesting points. When you talk about kind of like quarterback regression, you kind of still have to look at it as case by case thing. When it comes to Russell Wilson, I mean, you really have to look at the team around him. Many people would say that Russell Wilson's early career, he was more of a game manager, especially when he had the Legion of Boom, like basically carrying them. You have Marshawn Lynch there, beast mode, doing what he was doing for that team. It was definitely a run-first offense. Now, when you look at Baker, 28 passing touchdowns. This was far from a run-first offense, although they do have the potential to be a very balanced team. I mean, you mentioned Kareem Hunt. They won't have him for the first 8 weeks. Either way, they have an amazing running back right there in Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb, I think, would be a perfect 3-down running back. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance Kareem Hunt when he does come back. You're talking about, like I mentioned earlier, a guy that led the NFL in rushing yards just 2 seasons ago. And if I'm not mistaken, was leading the NFL in rushing yards prior to getting booted from the Chiefs last year. So that's definitely going to be an interesting kind of like balance they have to strike. I mean, as I kind of like saw personally in my NBA fanhood with team chemistry and the hype machine getting a little bit too strong with my 2018-2019 Boston Celtics. Sometimes when that hype is too hard, it could get in players' heads. And when you talk about like players that have been surrounded by media scrutiny their entire careers, I feel like Baker thrives off it a little bit more than a player like Odell. Odell, when he's been criticized the most, I do feel like he falters a little bit. Certainly leads to weird incidents like, remember when he punched the kicking post over there, the little practice kicking deal. When he did that, when he got in the fight with Josh Norman, like if you get into his head, you rattle his cage, it definitely does affect his performance on the field. And it's going to be interesting because there's a lot of weapons on this team. Odell, the last few years, has gotten used to being the only weapon on the team. Like, is he going to be able to take the hit to his ego of not having the ball the majority of the time? Jarvis Landry is going to get his. David Njoku is going to get his. We mentioned those 2 talent running backs they have back there. Heck, Baker's going to even like mix in some Callaway into this offense as well. It's kind of like their third receiver back there, provided he doesn't drop the ball. But I mean, I think that this overall is a very deep offense. But also the guy who's running the show is going to be very impactful in this. Freddie Kitchens is come over a lot of questioning because he's a rookie head coach. It's kind of a weird decision to hire him. Personally, I would probably have kept Greg Williams. I know Greg Williams is kind of a nut, kind of comes under scrutiny for being in the kind of a headhunting gate with the Saints, but at the same time, he definitely had that team playing with a lot of emotion towards the stretch run last year. I think it very much showed. Freddie Kitchens wasn't even calling plays until midway throughout the season, and it's kind of concerning. I think I worry about him getting ran over a little bit by these personalities.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say right there is it's hard for a first-time head coach, right, to be able to control such big personalities. And especially this team as constructed, you normally don't see this many stars, right, at least with that big of a personality on a football team. And even, honestly, Mike Tomlin had a tough time when you had Antonio Brown, Lev Bell, and Big Ben, right? So, and Tomlin had been, in the game for a while. At that point, he'd been head coach for a while. Has won a Super Bowl, but now, right, like Freddie Kitchens, who hasn't accomplished much, right, as far as being a head coach, now has to deal with some of the toughest personalities probably and most outgoing personalities in the sport. So, yes, I agree.
Yeah, I think if this team is going to succeed, you mentioned the defense. You kind of had your question marks about them. I actually think the defense is going to be one of the sneaky things that may carry this team. I am very high on Myles Garrett. He's a great personality. Like, if he can be more of a vocal leader in the locker room, I think that would be very good for this team because he's a very down-to-earth, humble kind of guy that I hope could ground some of these guys, these unique guys around the locker room. And then they went out this year. They stole in the later rounds Greedy Williams, who I'm very excited on. But unfortunately, the young guy's got to kind of keep his mouth shut. He was over one of the many that were talking Super Bowl, and you just can't do that if you're a rookie. if you've never been in the league before. But hey, kudos to what John Dorsey's been able to do with this team as far as a roster construction standpoint, because when he drafted Denzel Ward, I didn't know what to expect. I was very high on Bradley Chubb. I would have loved seeing Chubb and Garrett going after quarterbacks all day, but he went out, grabbed a lockdown corner in Denzel Ward, and he's one of my favorite cornerbacks to watch in the league. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 2 to 3 years he establishes himself as the number one quarterback. So I'm excited about this team like anyone. What goes right, like I said, it's just going to be a matter of their team chemistry not eating them alive. That's kind of my thought on it.
With this transformation of the Browns, right? Like, so think about how quickly they became good with, drafting Baker, adding, Odell Beckham Jr., Kareem Hunt, all these guys. If they go and do win a Super Bowl this year, is Dorsey the best GM?
Oh, hands down. Like, I think that there's an argument to be made he's already the best GM. Like, this team won a grand total of one game in 2 years? 1 game in 2 years. Like, that's just unheard of. And hey, 7-8-1. It's not a awe-inspiring record, but to go from 1 win to 7 wins in the NFL is nothing to snub your nose at, Mm-hmm. And if Baker was starting early in the season, they might even be 9-7, snuck into the wild card. If we recall those games they lost by missed field goals very early on, a little bit of so-so offense with Tyrod Taylor under quarterback. Obviously, Hugh Jackson. It's kind of, hey, kudos to Hugh. Like, it's a tough job being a quarterback or a head coach in the NFL. Like, it's one of those jobs that in one way I'd love to have, but in others, when you look at, you're always the first person to get the blame. I could understand where it'd be a little bit rattling, but at this point, Hugh Jackson has been established as probably one of the worst head coaches in modern NFL history. So with that said, like, this team, I'm not going to put them as a 1 or 2 seed. I think if they finish 11-5, I think that's a good season for them. And I think that would be good enough to win this division.
I think so. That's where about I had them in that 10-6, 11-5 range. 12-4 is a lot to ask. Though I will say their strength of schedule, they have the 23rd hardest, right? So they actually have a pretty good schedule.
The problem with it is it's very hard early on. Like, if you look, they have like a Monday night game in San Francisco. They play Tennessee week 1, and Tennessee, we're going to talk about them in a couple weeks. They're a very sneaky little playoff team themselves. They're a very tough, well-coached team, very balanced on defense, kind of a so-so offense, but they can give problems. And I also look forward to that week 2 matchup against the Jets. That's going to be very exciting game to see Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield, because I feel like their careers are forever going to be tied together, in particular by I'm sure you've heard Colin Cowherd. Like, Baker Mayfield basically hears Colin Cowherd every time he goes to sleep, apparently.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited to see some of the early season schedules, but it's kind of a tough way to go, but it does ease up dramatically after the first few weeks.
Yeah, I think you're right. As long as they can, keep calm, weather the storm, right? Even if it is rocky the first few weeks.
Yeah, if they're a 2-2 team through the first 4 weeks, I think that would be a success, to be honest. I know everyone in the land of media would be freaking out, condemning this team if they went 2-2, but I think that would be a very successful start to the year. And we've seen plenty of teams start off 2-2 and go to the playoffs. So
yeah. I'm excited for them. I think they're going to do well, especially being in Cleveland, right? A small market team that has historically been bad. I'm definitely excited for them. Happy for the fan base.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into the team you're probably most excited to watch. Your favorite, more like an NBA team. the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I want to let you lead this discussion. You tell me about your boys, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so obviously the whole world knows, right? There's a lot of drama all in one off season. However, sometimes I do think that there is addition by subtraction, right? So Antonio Brown, we know that he caused a lot of problems, especially when he was not the number one target. And I think we even saw that at times where Big Ben would overcompensate. So if Antonio Brown didn't get a lot of touches the previous game, Big Ben would almost force himself to throw to Antonio Brown the next game to get him his touches. And so I think by Antonio Brown not being there anymore, hopefully it means Big Ben can make the right play all of the time, regardless of who it's to. And Juju Smith-Schuster, in my opinion, even though he's definitely our wide receiver one, right? Like he's our primary option, I think he's less demanding of the football. I think he understands, hey, the best play for the team, right, is what we should do rather than get me my touches, give me my touchdowns. And so I'm excited about that. Lev Bell, I had thought he was definitely competing for being the best running back in the league. This is the part where I'm kind of on the player side, right? Like he wanted a long-term deal, especially being a running back. You never know when you're going to get hurt, right? So this going season to season franchise tag, I totally get where he's coming from. That being said, I'm glad that the Steelers won't have it looming over their head anymore, right? As of whether or not he's coming back, do we have to get him touches? So I'm excited. I think our offense is going to take a small step back. Big Ben had a pretty decent year last year, right? Statistically, I think he might have been the best quarterback.
Certainly, from many fantasy perspectives, he was one of the most statistically enamoring quarterbacks.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, so my concern, though, so he played all 16 games last year. If you look at all of his seasons ever since he started, there's only one time where he's played two 16-game seasons back-to-back. And he's only ever had 4 16-game seasons in his 15 seasons, right? So 11 years out of the 15 years, he's missed at least one game. Normally, he doesn't miss a whole lot more than that. It's usually 1 or 2. But there's been times where he's missed, 4 games, 5 games. And so that's my big concern is, can Big Ben stay healthy? Because right now, I don't think that there's a good backup quarterback. Dobbs is okay. I think he can keep you in the game if Big Ben goes down. Mason Rudolph, I heard, was not that impressive last year, though I hear he's looking better in training camp this year. But again, I still don't feel comfortable enough with any of our backups that if Big Ben goes down, which, like I said, statistically, he's only ever had, 1 back-to-back full game seasons, right? So it's very likely that we'll lose him for at least 1 game, if not 2 games.
Yeah, definitely the backup quarterback situation is a little concerning. Like when you look at kind of that quarterback depth chart, you would have hoped by now that Mason Rudolph or Dobbs would have been able to step into that role. But at this point, both of them do definitely look like, the term being Jags, just a guy, which, hey, if you can rely on James Conner, if he can take a step, they could get away with being a run-first offense for a few weeks. It's going to be interesting to see whether they run their offense the same way as they have in years past, where you do have a running back taking on such a large workload. I think James Conner showed at points he can do it. However, it did catch up to him. Obviously, he didn't finish the season, and I think that definitely showed. With that said, they do have a little sneaky player in Jalen Samuels there, and they did add another running back during the draft that I think could help them. Speaking of their draft, too, I mean, I was definitely the most excited whenever I saw them take Devin Bush. I thought that was actually a great pickup by them. Obviously, Shazier being gone has left a huge hole in that locker room for a while. I'm happy to see Shazier taking those next steps to get his life back together. Honestly, I, at this point, would wish that he probably just hang it up and step it up. But obviously, he has a warrior spirit. I certainly wish the best for Shazier in his recovery from this point. However, when you look at Devin Bush, he reminds me of he has that pedigree to be a top-tier linebacker for a very long time. He could be in the Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner tier from all indications. And when you look at the long lineage of Pittsburgh Steelers linebackers, he fits that mold. He's a very high character guy from everything I've heard. He's a great athlete. And he, to my knowledge, has no real injuries history too, which is comforting considering they're kind of thin at that position. Especially they lost a couple guys here in the offseason.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm definitely excited for Devin Bush. He definitely helps out our defense. That it's weird, you know, historically Pittsburgh has always been known for defense and then running back, right? In the past few years, I think we've been known more for offense, less of our defense. So this is really the first year, as long as all of our defensive players come back healthy, right? So I know TJ Watt right now is on the PUP list. So hopefully he'll get cleared soon. We'll get all of our defensive pieces. But I do feel like this is going to be the year, especially with Baltimore, who we'll get to in a second. I think Baltimore takes a step back defensively while Pittsburgh takes a step forward. And traditionally, when Pittsburgh has won their Super Bowls and has made it to their Super Bowls, they've been ranked first or second in the league, usually in defense, right? Depending on which metrics you use, whether it's yards or points allowed. So I feel like this might be one of those years where we finally get our defense back on track. And as long as Big Ben can sort of maintain his level of play, I definitely feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers have a good shot.
Well, you know, adding like young athletic like people to your front seven, I feel like is definitely the new wave of the NFL. Like, there's no arguing that the Pittsburgh Steelers had a horrendous pass defense last year, but when you really look at it, honestly, a majority of the top teams weren't all that in pass defense. I mean, the Chiefs had one probably even a worse pass defense than the Steelers, and did it really matter? They were in the AFC Championship game, and short of like one misstep, one bad play, they're probably in the Super Bowl. And the way the Rams played in that Super Bowl, probably winning the Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the formula for having a top defense in the NFL definitely has changed. I mean, definitely the rules have favored the passing game a lot more in years. So you're just going to naturally allow up a lot of passing yards and receiving yards nowadays. So with that said, I do think one of the other big headlines when it comes to the Steelers, though, is Mike Tomlin did get a little bit of an extension. Though anytime I hear a coach gets an extension, I don't put a ton of stock into it. I've seen coaches get extensions and then get fired that several months later. So, but we are talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers, though, when we talk about that. We're talking about a franchise that has had literally 3 head coaches in all of its existence. It's impressive. It's uncanny. And I like Mike Tomlin. I think he is a very amazing head coach. He's never had a losing season. The way we talk about the Steelers, you would think a 9-7, a 9-7-1. Yeah, what did they finish? You would think that they finished more like a 6-10 than a 9-win team last year.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that's the thing, right, is the Pittsburgh Steelers for a long time, at least outside of maybe recently the Patriots, right, has been one of the most, if not the most well-run organizations in the NFL, right? They've been consistent. They've consistently had success. There's not very many years where the Steelers are out of the playoffs. And so when you're, looking at Mike Tomlin's resume, if you compare him to most other coaches in the league, he's probably right now a top 10, if not a top 7, top 6 coach in the league. But it's just that it's always Super Bowl or bust is what it seems like for this team, right? They're always hoping for a Super Bowl every single year. And so I think you're right. I think there's a lot of pressure on Mike Tomlin. My concern is I don't know where you really go, though, if you move off of Mike Tomlin. So I think only giving him the 1-year extension is definitely telling him, hey, we still believe in you, but we're not giving you a long-term extension because we need you to have success. So I think they're trying to send a message of, hey, you're still our guy for now, right? But things could change if we don't start seeing going a little bit deeper into the playoffs, right? Getting past some of the hurdles that we've had. So I do think the Mike Tomlin situation is interesting. Like I said, I don't know who you really go after, though.
Well, at this point, to me, it's like, are you just trying to wait out Brady? Because clearly we all know the the Steelers' main roadblock is in Boston right now. I think that Mike Tomlin, the problem with Mike Tomlin basically is if you do get rid of him as Steelers, you know he's going to be hired in like less than a week.
Mm-hmm.
Not a Mike McCarthy situation here. Mike Tomlin is beloved. He definitely does. He's a player's coach, so he gets a lot of love. I think Mike Tomlin would probably be a great coach in college if he ended up getting dropped by the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think he would take an NFL job, though, or at least be offered an NFL job right away.
He would have tons, but some of these college coaches, they definitely get paid.
Definitely.
Especially if you're talking about a big-time program like USC.
Yeah, he can get paid, have a little bit easier, less pressure on him, still do well. I guess my wrap-up on the Steelers, I have them in that 9-7, 10-6 range, probably finishing second behind the Browns.
I would probably give them 10-6. What went right if they won this division? I think Ben comes into the season refocused after basically getting thrown under the bus by everyone departing Pittsburgh recently. I think that Mike Tomlin takes control of the locker room. I think that that's definitely very important for him this year, to reestablish himself as that guy, to show why the Steelers placed faith in him, giving him that extension. All right, let's move on. Okay, so the situation in Baltimore. Now, it's kind of weird ending on Baltimore. Like, obviously, they won the division. But I don't have a lot of faith in this team. I'm just going to give my schedule prediction for them right away. I see them as 6-10 finisher, and I just can't buy into Lamar Jackson leading this team. I think that the reason last season worked, it was obviously such a new offense. No one knew what to expect, and now we're talking about a league that has tape, and we've seen this happen 1,000 times. I had a personal front row seat with it with Colin Kaepernick. And to add to that, we even have the same offensive mind right now in Baltimore with Greg Roman that led to Colin Kaepernick. So I have my reservations about this offense being able to work. Now, they did get some interesting pieces there. I won't discount them getting Mark Ingram. I won't discount them getting Earl Thomas. But they also lost some pieces, too, on that defense. This top 5 defense, they lost Eric Weddle, who was declining, but still a very solid safety. They lost C.J. Mosley, which was the heart of their defense right there. Anytime you lose a middle linebacker who's basically your quarterback on defense, that's going to impact you. So this defense, I see them taking a huge step back. As far as the wide receiving unit, if they didn't draft Hollywood Brown, I don't really have much faith in anyone behind him. Their biggest strength right now is going to be at the tight end position. So you imagine they're probably going to run a lot of 2 tight end set with Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews. But I just don't see that being a winning formula in the NFL. They were ready to fire John Harbaugh prior to this renaissance that they had late in the season. If it wasn't for that little run, John Harbaugh is not on the head coaching of this team anymore. So I think this is a team that's going to regress. I think they're going to get caught up and they're going to get exposed, honestly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like you mentioned, I think it's just marked for regression, right? Lamar Jackson, honestly, his QBR was not very good. It was only like a 48.7, right? I know QBR tends to favor passers that are very good at passing. But a lot of these running quarterbacks, you begin to see them take step backwards right now. Obviously, RG3 was a little bit different of a situation. He got injured, yeah. But he took a step back. Like you said, Colin Kaepernick took a step back. Zeke is not the best passer, right? He's very athletic, mobile. He took a step back in his second and third year. And I just see Lamar Jackson, like you said, taking a step back. And even if they did supply other good offensive weapons, can Lamar Jackson even make good use of them, right? Like, he is basically a running back that just handles the ball and runs, right? He might make a few good short passes, but I don't know if he would even be able to make use of some very talented wide receivers, right, that are deep threats.
Yeah, I mean, and that's when you look at someone like Hollywood Brown, like, obviously when you have a run-first offense like they do, a very run-heavy offense, you know you're going to make the defense want to load up the box. That's just going to happen. So you would say that you should have a weak spot over the top. You know, with a player like Hollywood Brown, he should be able to just get on top of him. But I'm not 100% confident in Lamar Jackson's ability to hit a guy deep. At least when I look at someone like Colin Kaepernick, I did have a little bit more faith in his home run ball. Mm-hmm. I feel like Lamar Jackson will hit the occasional dinger, but I see him maybe more as a gap-to-gap doubles hitter, like if we're going to use kind of like this baseball metaphor. And we mentioned injuries with RG3. Like, John Harbaugh was asked, like, if he sees Lamar running over 100-plus times this year. He said, I imagine that number is only more. Now, Lamar is a smaller frame quarterback. That's going to open him up a lot more, you know, to get hurt. And now you can't measure all contact the same. Like, if it's anything like, again, going back to Kaepernick was actually very fortunate. He actually did a great job of avoiding contact. He would get out the sidelines, out of bounds, slide. But that's a lot of luck is involved. You have some very fast athletes out on the field there. Lamar was used to being the quickest guy on the field in college, and that's just not the case in the NFL. Everyone's as fast as Lamar Jackson in the NFL.
Yeah, especially the defensive players, right? When you have, you know, linebackers that are chasing you down that are bigger, right, but just as quick, it definitely is going to hurt, right? And you run that risk of injury.
So, yeah, I mean, we talk about running backs having short shelf lives because of the accumulation of hits they take. You know, eventually those hits are going to take off on Lamar, and I don't see him having the long-term longevity at that frame to be able to sustain himself. He gets compared to Michael Vick a lot. Heck, Michael Vick even said that he thinks Lamar has the potential to be better than him, which is a bold claim in itself. Look what derailed Michael Vick's career: injuries.
Yep.
And, you know, other incidents, but we won't discuss those.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm going to say, hey, for Baltimore to win this division, I definitely think it would take a lot, right? Like, their defense would have to still perform just as well despite losing those key players. Like you had said, I think Lamar Jackson is going to have to show us something that he's more than just a running quarterback, right? Like, he can actually now granted, his QB record, right? Like, so his win-losses was fantastic last year. But again, I think there's other statistics besides win-losses he's going to have to improve in. And their offensive weapons, I think, you know, Mark Ingram's going to have to be just as good as he was with the Saints. And Hollywood Brown is going to have to show that he's like his cousin.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, you're not even hearing great things out of training camp, like as far as Lamar taking that next step in accuracy. So it's hard to have a lot of faith in that, like, turning around. So, yeah, if this team wins the division, it's going to be lack of regression on the defensive side and Lamar showing something in the passing game. That's going to be it. So my prediction, like I said, 6-10, roughly.
Yep. That's about what I have. 6-10, 7-9, somewhere around there.
Maybe could be a fringe playoff team. We'll see. Okay, so we're going to move off the AFC now. We're going to move into the NFC. Same format. We're going to start from the bottom of the standings last year, so that would give us the joy of talking about the Detroit Lions right now. When I look at the Lions, obviously in our lifetime, they have been historically bad. They've had Matthew Stafford's been on that team for a long time. I know Golden Tate recently insisted that he's the best quarterback he ever played with, even better than Russell Wilson. but I've just never seen that sustain success with Matthew Stafford. I definitely believe in the ability, but, now, too, it's not even just about on the field production. He's got a lot of stuff going off the field. I'm sure you've heard about the situation with his wife. That's going to weigh in a guy's head. I don't care what anyone says. But I don't hate this team, to be honest. I liked a lot of the moves they made in the offseason. Matt Patricia definitely got thrown under the bus, and it makes sense because he already got the label of another failed Belichick guy. I wasn't even sold on him as a hire in the first place when he first got the job. I didn't think the New England defense, when he was running the team, was particularly always thrown out there to be. But when you hear players like their newest addition, Mike Daniels, giving him praise that he's a defensive genius, you kind of have to start listening to that if players buy into him that much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I want to go back real quick to Matt Stafford, right? So if you look at last year, it was his third lowest touchdown percentage ever, right, in his career. He also threw the third most interceptions, I want to say, last year. So it was really down as far as his statistical numbers. Not only that, but he's been sacked, right, like 1.5 more times for every hit than players like a Tom Brady, a Drew Brees. I think he's even, if you compare him year by year, he gets sacked more than even Ben Roethlisberger, right? So that's my main concern with Matt Stafford is he's getting older. Like you said, there's some distractions with, his wife. He had sort of a down year. And so I'm wondering if it's maybe a system, right? Like there was a new system in place and he was not used to it. So maybe that's why his stats were a little bit lower than you'd expect. But I'm hoping this trend does not continue for him. That's my main concern right now with them.
Well, I think if the Lions are going to have success, and ultimately what I would say would give them the best shot at winning this division would be for this establishment of the run game to work. They invested their first-round pick in T.J. Hawkinson, who by all indications is the best blocking tight end coming out of the draft this year. He's also, from what I hear in training camp, just amazing in the red zone right now. So that should be something to watch. But it's not like it's the first time that the Lions have ever invested high on the tight end position for Matthew Stafford. So it's going to be a matter of, will he be able to consistently find him? Maybe that's more of a fantasy argument, but even in real life, I don't think he ever was able to fully use players like Brandon Pettigrew or Eric Ebron to their fullest potential. I mean, obviously, we saw what Andrew Luck was able to do with Eric Ebron as soon as he got out there. Everyone, for the most part, thought Eric Ebron was a draft bust, and it was hard to argue when you look at his production throughout his time in Detroit. I think, though, what's interesting to me is Matt Patricia definitely wants to bring over that New England culture. He brings in a guy like Trey Flowers. Maybe some will argue that he was overpaid. Brings in a Danny Amendola. Players like this. Heck, even besides T.J. Hawkinson, they even added Jesse James, which you can argue that Jesse James' greatest skill is that he's tall. You can't teach 6'7". But I think that it's a huge cultural shift. And you were hearing reports last year that there was a lot of players that weren't really buying into it. And it makes sense. You were a part of the Belichick system. You weren't Bill Belichick. He hadn't earned that street cred with a lot of players at that point. So to come in and act like he was the next Bill Belichick probably turned off a lot of the veteran players. But now he's bringing in guys that actually believe in him, that think that he is a talented coach. And I think that's going to change the culture a lot. I think that this division is actually wide open. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if the Lions were a worst to first kind of team. By all indications, everywhere I read about their grading their draft, they had some late round stills. They picked up a very talented corner out of Penn State in the 4th round. Many thought he was a second round product. They maybe reached in the 2nd round on a linebacker out of Hawaii, but they made some other quality picks, and I think that the accumulation of that, they got one of the big defensive linemen out of Clemson this year. I think that he's another guy that could be one of Matt Patricia's little rotational defensive linemen that could add pressure to a quarterback position, which, hey, when you play in a division with Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, you definitely want to apply pressure to that position. Overall predictions, where I could see this team finishing, I could see them as a 7-9, 8-8 team. I'm going to give them that.
Yeah, I agree. That's about where I had them. 7-9 is what I had. Now, that being said, right, like I don't think they're going to be an amazing team, but I do think they're the most underrated team, at least in this division. Maybe not necessarily the whole NFL, but at least in this division, I think they're the most underrated team. Again, I'm not saying that they're a fantastic team, especially all the questions surrounding Matt Patricia, like you mentioned. But I think, as you stated, this division is sort of wide open, and especially they are tied for having the 19th hardest schedule, right? So that means that there could be potentially some easy games on their schedule that they might be able to pick up and jump a few teams in the division, or at least a team or two, right? That you might not expect them to beat out.
Yeah, and strength of schedule year to year often changes. I mean, strength of schedule is based off teams records a year ago, and a lot of the teams that had generous records also had to play last place schedules. So that's why this league is parity. So teams like the Detroit Lions definitely can make that leap in a short amount of time. So I think they're going to be a gritty team. They're going to fight. They're going to be basically a thorn in the ass of a lot of teams in the NFC North this year, or even NFC contenders. If you see the Lions on your schedule, I'm not going to treat that as a W by any means. I think you have to treat it as you're in for a tough game. Heck, Matt Patricia beat his mentor last year.
Yeah.
And everyone was blown away. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting squad. I don't think that the people in Detroit have come a long way from having paper bags on their head.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And the last thing I guess I'll say, and this isn't necessarily so much Lions related, I think just in general for this division, is I really do think that it could be one of those situations where the number 1 team and the number 4 team are separated by only 3 games or something.
Yeah, and we'll touch on the Bears and why they may regress a little bit here in a second. But first, we're going to jump into the next team up, a very interesting squad. I mean, certainly led by their quarterback. We're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers. So obviously, Aaron Rodgers has come over the most fire he's ever had in his career over this last couple year stretch, whether it be his issues he's had with his parents, his family, getting thrown under the bus by former teammates himself, very similar to a Big Ben situation. That scathing article that came out about not only him, but the whole Mike McCarthy situation as a whole, hearing he was potentially sabotaging plays or just outright ignoring his coach. It's been said by a lot of places, but really what's going to come down to this team having success is Aaron Rodgers going to buy into the idea of being coached? Right now, he's been very resistant. And, hey, I will say this. I mean, he's played in the NFL for a long time now. He got coached up by one of the greats of all time, and Brett Favre. And he's won a Super Bowl. But I think that at this point, Aaron Rodgers has bought into his own hype so much that it's hard to deflate an ego like that.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to that, right? Like so many people that I've heard talk about the Green Bay Packers, and we hear it all the time, is Aaron Rodgers a better quarterback than Tom Brady? Now, a lot of people say, well, he doesn't have as many Super Bowl rings, right? But he's skill-wise the better of the quarterbacks, which I can see an argument for that. But a lot of people just chalk up wins because it's just Aaron Rodgers. And I think he is somewhat overrated. He's still very good, but he's definitely a little bit overrated, especially this year. I think he's lost a lot of good offensive pieces, right, that they didn't necessarily replace. And I think he's going to be challenged a lot more, even more so than possibly in past years.
Well, if Aaron Rodgers had it his way, apparently he would have thrown it to Devontae Adams like 200 plus times. And hey, if you own Devontae Adams in your PPR league, fantastic, great, good for you. But that's probably not a winning formula of games. Like I watched his game against Minnesota last year, and I was very disappointed when I see like he did not look like the Aaron Rodgers that I basically grown up with. Hey, he had that amazing streak of not throwing an interception or turning the ball over. That's great. That's fantastic. Turnover ratio is one of the keys to winning football games.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that was kind of a hollow statistic, because the amount of times I saw Aaron Rodgers throw the ball away, or try and make an audible and that play go nowhere, was very profound. I noticed. And I think that kind of led to the ultimate demise. When you look at kind of like the Mike McCarthy, Aaron Rodgers situation, you have to assume it was basically they've been together so long that marriage had kind of ran its course, and that Mike McCarthy's voice probably more or less sounded like white noise going in and out of Aaron Rodgers' ear. But I just don't like the reports I'm hearing right now between him and Matt LaFleur. Matt LaFleur is a very young head coach. And some would argue him getting the job was even a little bit questionable because his OC run in Tennessee wasn't necessarily the greatest, or awe-inspiring by any means either. Like, he was touted as an offensive genius, but we didn't really see it. Granted, could that be more so the talent he had to work with? Was Marcus Mariota a little bit of a letdown quarterback? Yeah, I can see it from that end as well. But I didn't see him enhance the talent in the way I would have liked to seen. And I don't know if that's necessarily going to take Aaron Rodgers to the next level. I think Aaron Rodgers kind of just is what he is, Like, we've established what his skill set is, what he's able to do. He's an athletic quarterback, but he's not getting younger either. And has a much different playing style by Brady. It's definitely more reckless abandonment. I mean, and that's led to countless injuries. He's playing hurt all of last year. And I just don't really know if he can keep up this pace.
Yeah, I definitely agree. What I will say with the Green Bay Packers, I do think that they improved on defense, especially their secondary.
Oh, absolutely.
The fact that they were able to steal Adrian Amos, right, especially from an in-division rival, is huge. And so hopefully that defense, can get a lot of stops for them and then keep their offense on the field more. But you're right. I do think we've seen Aaron Rodgers get injured, right? Like he just had a broken collarbone not too long ago.
Knee injury.
Knee injuries. And so I think that's a huge thing. And I honestly think sort of the aura around Aaron Rodgers is starting to dissipate a little bit, right? And there's certain athletes where I think they have an aura about them, right? LeBron James had it for a long time. Kobe Bryant had it for a long time. I think you could even say that Tom Brady still has it, right? But eventually, as these quarterbacks and just overall athletes, they start to get older, they start losing a little bit more games. I think people start to not give them as much respect as they did in the past, and they start playing against them a little bit tougher. I think teams will always play them tough, definitely, but now I think they don't give them as much respect. Right. And so I think Aaron Rodgers might not command as much respect as he once did on the football field.
And you could say that maybe that could work to his advantage in the long run, too. Like, maybe now that the hype has cooled down a little bit, he can just get to just playing football, relax, take it off. With that said, I thought that you mentioned LeBron's name. I think that was a very astute comparison because in many ways, at least Aaron Rodgers' last couple of years have felt very much similar to LeBron's first year in LA. I definitely kind of see that vibe. That's older player kind of aging very quickly in front of us vibe. It's going to be very interesting to see. Let's kind of like, well, obviously we've pounded talking about Aaron Rodgers and Endured makes sense. He is the heart and soul of this team ultimately, but I do like a lot of the pieces around him. Aaron Jones, I think if he gets a little bit more run, could be a very dynamic back to watch. I enjoy watching him. He's a tough runner. He's very athletic. He got a little undersold coming out of UTEP, and it makes sense. It's a smaller school. For whatever reason, Mike McCarthy held some sort of grudge against him, maybe because he was getting in trouble. And, you know, an older kind of like meathead coach like Mike McCarthy, I could see where he would take offense to a player getting suspended for a couple games by the NFL and basically hold it against him for the entire year. I don't think Matt LaFleur will have that many reservations, though, to use a talented player like Aaron Jones. He definitely started figuring it out a little later in the year with Derrick Henry and Deion Lewis. So I think that he can apply that same kind of skill set to Aaron Jones. I think he's going to mix in a little bit of Jamal Williams, too, who is by all means a solid runner. It's not flashy, just kind of does everything well. I think that's important to have in a backfield sometimes. And then it's going to come down to, are these younger wide receivers going to take the next step? You have Montez Valdez-Scantling there, Geronimo Allison, Equinemius St. Brown. A lot of long names. Yep. But if they can take that next step in their development, it's going to only open up the field for the Devontae Adams, Jimmy Graham, who's on his last legs. And, I'm interested to kind of see where that goes. As far as my predictions for where this team goes, I don't know if they're going to be able to overcome kind of Aaron Rodgers' ego and reservations about Matt LaFleur. I've heard this mentioned before in other places I kind of go to get my knowledge, but I could see Matt LaFleur being a one-and-done head coach. And I'm going to say this team 6-10.
Really? You have them that low? So I have them slightly higher. I have them 8-8. So I think this team has the most variation. If the young guys come through, like you said, right, their young receiving core, if they come through, I think they can be a very good team, especially with the improvements off the defense. But I just don't know. They can be very bad as well, right? And Matt LaFleur might not be a very good coach, which indications are him and the quarterback are not getting along, right? Him and Rodgers. So I just think there's so much variation. I have them at 8-8, but I can very well see them being worse than that. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they won a few games. I don't think they would have a 12-4 season by any means. But I might see them at a 9-7 possibly being their ceiling.
Yeah, I guess I just am a little bit more down on them at this point. I just have to assume that Aaron Rodgers' ego is as fragile as Matt LaFleur's Achilles. So I guess we'll kind of see where this team goes, but I could see them rounding out the bottom of the division. Actually, we're still working up to the Bears, but let's talk about the Vikings. So they made a lot of headlines last year when they made probably the most noteworthy quarterback free agent acquisition since Peyton Manning. Just unfortunately wasn't at the same level of talent as that acquisition was for the Broncos. When it comes to Kirk Cousins, I just don't believe he has that inner dog in him, and it shows in his record against other competitive winning teams. The fact that he had nothing against the Miami Dolphins, which, hey, I thought this team was competing. I mean, it really just goes to show you that you can't year to year variation on teams. You can't just say, oh, if we just replace this one piece, it equals Super Bowl. Going back to, I mentioned with my Celtics earlier, a lot of our fans were in the mindset of, oh, we make it to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. So naturally, we had Kyrie and Gordon Hayward. We're going to the finals. That's how a lot of Vikings fans felt like, oh, we had Case Keenum, but if we replace him with a slightly better quarterback, this team that was basically a Super Bowl team will make that next step. Well, it just didn't really materialize for them how they were expecting. You saw it kind of blow up at times. One of the most noteworthy videos of last season was Adam Thielen just berating Kirk Cousins on the sideline for not targeting one when it was open. And, there is a lot of talent on this team. I think that the defense can rebound from where they were and be more similar to what they were in the 2017 season than what they were in 2018. And even in 2018, they weren't terrible. It's just hard to maintain that top 3 defense level year after year. I think the last defense to repeat in total, a lot of the total defensive metrics, was the Legion of Boom Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I think the thing with the defense too, right? So they're losing Sheldon Richardson, who's huge, right? So he's a top 20 DT in the league. I think you're right about Kirk Cousins as well. He's a very good quarterback, right? So he's sort of stuck in that, hey, he's better than your average quarterback, but he's not quite a top tier quarterback, like a Pat Mahomes, right? Or a Tom Brady or an Aaron Rodgers. And he's not able to get you past that hump. And so the Minnesota Vikings, I have them being my division winner, actually, right? I even put them above the Bears this year. I don't know if they'll ever get over that hump to make a Super Bowl. Like you said, they're very good. But in my opinion, they're going to be just one of those teams that always competes for the playoff spot, maybe makes it into the playoffs, but never quite makes it.
Yeah, I don't see them as championship tier roster this year. I think it's kind of disappointing too, because I do like their head coach, Mike Zimmer. I think he's one of the better head coaches in the league. I think I would like to see him compete for a title, but I think unfortunately his career is not going to result in one. I think that they have some very good stories. Like, I'd love to see Adam Thielen has constantly overcome, obviously, a 6th-round draft pick. I think that's very telling of that guy's character.
And him and Dick are one of the best, if not the best, right, duo, probably wide receiver duo in the league right now. And
I'd put them with any 1-2 punch in the league right now. Certainly with when you consider Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster are not around anymore, you start to kind of look around the league. There's not too many that impose fear quite in the same way that Thielen and Diggs do. Now it's just a matter of, obviously, the wide receiver is very dependent on the quarterback position. Now, they can get their numbers, but is it going to be stat padding, or is it going to be something that translates into wins? And obviously a big contention that Mike Zimmer had with his offensive coordinator last year is that they were throwing the ball too much. So I think there's going to be obvious regression in those two's numbers, and they're going to transition into being more of a run-first team, which with Dalvin Cook, I think could be successful. I definitely think they could benefit from utilizing their strength on defense and being a run-first team. They went out, they improved the offensive line, which I think was a must. Obviously, Kirk Cousins was getting beat up too much, and it's kind of a shame when you invest that much money into a quarterback. One of the big things you should do is protect them, first of all. Especially if you're going to make it a guaranteed contract, because they're going to pay Kirk Cousins out regardless of what happens. So they should have at least took the proper steps to make sure he's on his feet. As far as this team, where I see them finishing, I'm going to put them. You had them as your division winner. I could see that too. I think I'm going to put them as a 9-7 finisher. So they're not going to be one of the more premier division winners in the league, probably a 4 seed, if anything. But I think 9-7 will be fine if we're going to say this is going to be one of the more competitive divisions in the league. And as far as them winning a playoff game, I think they have first-round exit written all over them.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I said, to me, they're my division winner. Their floor is the highest out of the 4 teams, probably. But that being said, their ceiling is also very low when it comes to playoff teams.
Yeah. Interesting little team, but I just don't think it's going to happen, Minnesota. Let's just move on. Let's talk about the Chicago Bears here. I actually think Chicago is going to take a huge step back. And this is going to be controversial. But this kind of goes into what I mentioned earlier when I applied it to the Vikings. Year after year, defenses have trouble maintaining that top spot. And a lot of people do have kind of the thought process that the Bears are going to take that next step on defense. And I don't blame them, but Khalil Mack got banged up a little bit last year. I could see him getting banged up a little bit this year as well. You mentioned they lost one of their better corners to a division rival in Adrian Amos. And I'm just not sold on Trubisky. You talk about floors and ceilings. I think if Trubisky's bad, that establishes their floor. And they were at the top of the draft just a couple years ago, too. So is last year kind of going to be a flash in the pan? I guess we'll see. But I don't see them taking that next step like other people. Maybe I'm just blind, but enlighten me.
No, I definitely see them taking a step backward. So I have them going about 9-7, being second in the division. I think that 12-4 season, part of it too could have been the underrating of Mitch Trubisky last year, right? Like a lot of people, I mean, his rookie season was not very good. A lot of people probably thought, oh, he probably won't be that good. But now everybody has tape. So similar take, like you said, to Lamar Jackson, right? Once everybody has tape on you, especially in the NFL, teams are much quicker to pick up on that. So I think they're going to be prepared for their defense, which, as you mentioned, right, takes a hit. I think teams are going to be more well prepared for their offense. They also lost Jordan Howard. I've heard that some of their replacement running backs have not been, too bad. I've heard they've been sufficeable.
Yeah, you're talking about David Montgomery as big names getting thrown around this offseason. Tariq Cohen.
Tariq Cohen's still there, but he's a very different type of back, in my opinion. Right? He's more of your receiving back rather than your full out running back.
But you can argue with that and say that that's probably the new wave of the NFL. I mean, we saw Christian McCaffrey really take the league by storm last year, and it's just going to be really dependent on Tariq Cohen whether he can kind of like take some more steps like Christian McCaffrey did, bulk up a little bit, do stuff to protect himself, because at a smaller frame, he's obviously more susceptible to injury, and playing in the harsh cold conditions of Chicago definitely do kind of make you more prone to get little tweaks and stuff here and there. And he relies on his speed, so that's definitely the last thing he wants.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have too much else to say about this team. I think you're right. I think they regress backwards. I definitely do not see them having another 12-4 season. Even 11-5 season is hard for me to imagine for them.
And too, it's not even mentioning too, they lost their defensive coordinator to Vic Fangio, who's one of the most well-respected defensive coordinators in football. He's now the head coach in Denver. So, like, when you do change regimes, like that leaves you susceptible to regression on the defensive front. They're implementing a new system with new players. You can't just expect them to be the same defense they were last year. I think that's a little unreasonable. With that said, anytime their defensive unit is on the field, they arguably have the best player in the field with Khalil Mack. So we'll see what that kind of does. I'm going to go lower on them. I am going to put them, I put Detroit, that's about 7-9. I'm going to put them at 7-9.
7-9?
Yeah.
So big step back within in your
Yeah, and that pretty much puts you talked about that point earlier that everyone in the NFC North you could see finishing within 3 games of each other. I think that's about what I can see as well. I'm excited to see them in the opening game against Green Bay. They're going to be our season opener on Thursday Night Football. I'm ready for it. League's 100th year. I think we did some good work here on this podcast right now.
Yeah.
You happy with it? I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
I hope everyone else is happy with it and when they give this a listen. So once again, my name is Julian Martinez.
Yep, I'm Aundre Huynh.
And thank you for listening to the first edition of the SlumpBuster podcast. We'll be back next week. We're going to be talking about we're going to be talking about the AFC and NFC East next week. Exciting, old man Brady. We're going to talk about the Zeke contract situation more when we get into the Cowboys. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.